Afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing me to come and talk about money to you guys. I've been watching the speeches and stuff before, and it's all very interesting, uplifting, very moral, very fantastic. I'm going to be a little bit more prosaic, I'm afraid. Sorry. Okay, so what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about a professional design environment. I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, but I think it's vitally important. I'm going to talk about cash, dirty word. I'm not going to talk about profit too much. I'm going to talk about man hours and how much they cost you. Remember, you're selling time. I know you may be doing things on fee base, but you are actually selling your time. I'm going to talk about how I think you should do fee bids, rather than that sort of thing. You know, it's approximately this. I'll also talk about timesheets. I know. And I'm going to talk about how we should record profits on our projects. Okay. So, professional design environment. What do I mean by that? You are a profession, yeah? And you provide a professional service to your clients. And actually, I am constantly amazed at how good you are at your service with your clients. Yeah, I've been working in architecture for 20 years, and compared to engineers, I think your service to your client is better in many ways. I was in the engineering sector before architecture. However, internally, you act like a bunch of amateurs. Yeah? I'm sure plenty of you recognize that, yeah? What I'm saying to you is you shouldn't be acting like a bunch of amateurs. One of the reasons why architecture's fallen behind a lot of the other professional services, and we've lost things that we did in our industry for many years, is simply because we've acted poorly internally, and that's allowed people who act more professionally internally to steal a march on us. But when I say acting professionally, it doesn't mean anything that needs to get in the way of design. Yeah? Design is the most important thing that you do, and to be honest, I think it's vital. So you need to put design first, I accept that, but what I'm saying to you is at the moment in a lot of firms, design sits here, and finance, if I can get that low, sits right down there. And what I'm saying to you is you need to push finance further up in your business. Not there, I accept that, but maybe about there. Yeah? Okay, so let's talk about cash. Now, a lot of you will probably be aware of this little fact, but on average, 1 in 3 businesses fail. But they don't fail because they're not making any money. They fail because they run out of cash. Yeah, now, that's an interesting fact. So what does that mean? So there's a trite little saying, and I'm going to repeat it because it's actually true. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king. And what I mean by that is I can go out and win all the work in the world. So if the market rate is 1%, I can go and bid 0.5%, and I can win loads of work. So I'm getting turnover. Turnover is the amount I'm billing to clients. So I win my turnover, that's just pure vanity. Because I'm not making any money on it. Because I've underbid everyone else, I'm not bidding at the market. I can do that, I can bid at the market, win my work, and make money. So I'm making profit. But that profit's no good if I'm not collecting the money from my clients. Yeah? So if I'm not invoicing. Quite frequently I go into offices and they've got all these fantastic projects and they haven't raised an invoice for 3 months. I mean, how are you going to collect your cash? It's crazy. So the cash becomes the most important thing. So you can do your turnover, you can do your profits, make sure you get your cash. Now, I'm going to talk about a cash flow, and quite often I go cash flow and I get this blank look back at me. And that's because no one's ever been told what a cash flow is. And all a cash flow is a simple spreadsheet that tells you the amount of money that you're going to receive. And when I talk about the amount of money you're going to receive, it's not when you're going to invoice it, it's when your client's going to pay it to you, which is frequently a lot later, as we all know. And then what your expenditure is against that in that month, giving you a running total. I'd like you to run one of these for about 6 months. Yeah. Now, I'm going to talk about quite a few things going in this talk, but one of the things that I can say to smaller businesses, you may not want to do some of the things I'm going to talk about. You may have no ability to do it. If you're a sole trader, you may not have the facility or need to run some of the things I'm going to talk about. But you do need a cash flow. You can run a business off a cash flow. So if there's one thing you take away today, go away and do a cash flow. Yeah? And actually, thinking about it, up to a scale of about 10 people, you can probably successfully run a business with just a cash flow. Once you get a bit bigger than that, you start to need a lot of the other things I'm going to talk about. Okay, costs per man hour. I go into a lot of people and I say to them, do you know how much it costs for you for each person that works in your business? And they all go, yeah, I know. And then when you actually look at what they're doing, they don't. They rarely know what it actually costs them. And when you think that that's what you're actually selling, if you don't know what it costs you, how can you then set the price for it? So it's vitally important that you, in your offices, know how much it costs you. And your cost is not just your salary or your dividends or whatever it is. It's also the cost of running your business. So when you've got a salary of £10 per hour, let's say, there's usually an extra added on cost to that. And that cost is your overhead cost. And overheads, what are overheads? So overheads are the cost of running your business. So these are the other costs that happen. So rent, PI insurance, IT, utilities, telephone, etc., etc., etc. These are the costs of running the business that will always occur whether you're doing projects or not. That's what an overhead is. The other cost that you have in your business is a direct expense. And direct expense is a cost that only occurs because you've won that project. Classic example, travel to site. It wouldn't have happened unless you had that project, or the printing on that project, or whatever, or the time you spend on it. So, quick question for you. What's the biggest overhead in most professional services firms? There we go. Unpaid work. That's exactly right. It's the time that the fee earners, the architects in this case, spend on work other than projects. Most people think it's the rent, but it's not. So you're thinking, how much time do people spend not on projects? Well, people go on holiday. I know, it's very kind of us to give them holidays. People are sometimes sick. Yeah. Sometimes they're doing BD, business development. Sometimes they're doing training, CPD. Yeah, that time costs money. And it's time that you're not recovering as an owner of a business from a project. And it is the highest overhead in your business. So why do we want to cost man hours other than to charge clients? Well, the real reason is what we're trying to do in a business is we're trying to recover all the costs of running your business on your projects, such that at the end of the year, when you take all the profits on your projects, they equal the profits in the business. Now, that's a very easy check to make if you record this stuff, and I'll talk about recording profits on projects in a minute. But if you actually think about this, I've got 10 projects. Each one makes £10,000. I've got £100,000 on them, and yet I don't have £100,000 profit in my business. Why? The reason is always because your man-hour rates are wrong. So when you're looking at projects and you're making profits on them, and then you've got a different figure in your overall business, that's because the rates you're using are incorrect. 90% of the businesses I go into are using incorrect man-hour rates. Yeah? So how many people actually do use cost rates? Show of hands, please. Quite a few. Go away and check whether the profit on your projects in that year equal the profits in the business. If they don't, you're using the wrong cost rates. Don't panic. There's lots of ways of calculating cost rates. There's lots of ways of doing things. It doesn't matter if your cost rates aren't correct, as long as you know by how much they're out. Yeah? But if you need help doing cost rates, there are plenty of people out there who can calculate cost rates. Lots of accountants can do it for you. If you've got cost rates, that's what I use to do a fee bid. Now, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people do fee bids by going, oh, it's sort of that, or I know it's about 1%, or something like that. I don't like that way of doing fee bids. I prefer to do what's called a bottom-up fee bid. That's a top-down fee bid. I prefer to do a bottom-up fee bid. So I think you should always do a resource plan when you're doing a fee bid. And that's taking your scope of work. You should have a scope of work, by the way. You should have a program too. If you're doing fee bids without scope of work and program, very difficult. You then cost that resource plan using the cost rates that we just talked about. You need to add some direct expenses, unless you're reimbursing them. You need a contingency. A lot of people miss this out. If you're doing a fee bid and it's for something you know how to do for a client you've always worked for, you don't need much contingency. But if you're working for a new client, you don't know how demanding they are, put a bit extra cost in there. So a bit of contingency. Inflation. If you're going to work for more than 12 months on a project, you can be darn sure your staff are going to be asking for salary increases. So your cost in 12 months' time isn't going to be what it was now. So you need to add some inflation in there. And then you need to add a bit of profit. And when you add a profit margin, very quickly, you mark up your cost. If you want a 20% profit, you need to mark up your cost by 25%, not 20%. Haven't got time to explain why that's the case, but that is the case, trust me. As I mentioned, ensure you have both a scope of services and a program. Clients sometimes won't give them to you, so provide one for them and tell them in your fee bid, this is the scope I'm assuming, and this is the program I'm assuming, and if there's any change to that, I'll come back with a variation to my fee. Check your fee bid before issuing it. Yeah. The best way is actually to know a QS. Yeah? Because a QS knows what the market rate is better than anyone else, because this is what they do. So find a friendly QS, buy them a beer, and they won't tell you what Fred charged, but they'll tell you what the market rate is for that kind of work. You've got to negotiate this fee. One of the reasons I say you must have a fee bid done the way I say is because it gives you your cost. You know what it's actually going to cost you to do the work. So that when the client comes back in the sure and certain thing of saying, actually, I'm not going to pay that much. I've only got this much. Yeah? You know what your bottom line is. You know how much it's going to cost you, so you know whether you can or cannot do that work for that rate. When you do negotiate, always write. Clear in communication, open and honest. If I stand here talking to you like this, you're thinking, that's a bit of a weird chap. You're probably thinking that anyway, but you'd think I was even weirder. Okay? So be relaxed, flexible and positive, friendly. Let's not be antagonistic. There's no need to be antagonistic. Even if people are antagonistic towards you, always be friendly, open, positive. If someone says, I want to reduce the fee, say yes. But do say, which scope aren't I doing then? Yeah? Don't say no. No closes the whole conversation. It's so much easier to stand your ground once you're confident of the facts, and this comes back to what I'm saying about knowing what your cost is. Because if you know your cost, you can stand your ground. Always have a little bit of fat in there. You can put a bit of higher contingency than you think you'll need, or you might make your resource a bit higher so that you're ready for your negotiation. This is vital. Know your bottom line and walk away. Don't work for nothing. This comes back to what Sarah said earlier about the design. I hate competitions too. Design is so important. It's what we're selling in this industry. Don't devalue it. Absolutely not. And this is something we're not good at. Explain the client the benefits of using an architect and you, and explain what they get for your fee. Timesheets. A necessary evil. They're not an evil. So all we use timesheets for in the industry is to help us to allocate the correct cost to a project so we know what it's costing us, and also to record productivity. There are no productivity measures really in professional services firms, so they tell us. That's not true. The amount of time that you spend on contracts is a classic productivity measure, as is the turnover per fee earner, as is the profit per fee earner. These are classic productivity measures that we can use in professional services firms. So we need timesheets in order to get our productivity measures out, to make sure we have the right costs, and to make sure we know how the projects are doing. So if there's another thing you take away today, please do your timesheets and please do them in a timely manner. Job costing. What's job costing then? Well, it's a fancy name for the collection of all the costs on a project. So how do we get costs on a project? We just talked about timesheets. They bring the man-hour costs on, plus the overhead cost if we got the correct cost rate and everything's calculated correctly. We then allocate our direct job costs onto the project. So these are those costs I talked about earlier, travel to site, printing on the job, that kind of thing. And then we stick our sales invoices on there. Once we've done that, we know what our profit is on the job. But I will say one thing to you. Knowing what the profit is today is of no use to me. Absolutely none whatsoever. What is of use to you and me is knowing what the profit is going to be at the end of that job, not what it is today. So, sounds difficult, doesn't it, all that stuff I've talked about? It isn't. It's reasonably complex and takes a little bit of time, but there are things out there that can help you. Now, for very small businesses, you could use Xero and Workflow Max. Yeah? Xero is an accounting software online in the cloud, very cheap, £20 a month, something like that to run it. Workflow Max is an app that works with it which collects time and does all the job costing that I've just talked about. So you can use things like that if you're a smaller firm. There are lots of other things out there. I'm just giving you an example of what's cheap and available online. There's things like CMAP, which is like Workflow Max, only much more complicated, much more expensive, clearly. But if you put Xero and Workflow Max together, it would probably cost you just over £100 a month, and that would do probably all most businesses will need in terms of looking after the finance of your business. So, I was asked to do top 3 takeaways, so I have them. Number 1, do a cash flow. If you do nothing else, do a cash flow. Ensure you know what it costs you to do your work, and then produce sensible fee bids using those cost rates. And then record what you do and know what the final outturn cost and profit will be on all of your projects. And that's me. Thank you very much.